And good evening. Welcome back tonight. We are going to span the technical halfway point in the middle of the sermon tonight, be halfway through our seminar. To me, the peak, though, is tomorrow night. We spent 4 nights talking about a relational theology. This is the third of 3 nights talking about the nuts and bolts issues, how to have a relationship with Jesus. And then tomorrow night is kind of the high point for me, theologically, relationally. Tomorrow night's going to be get a nap. It's a tough night. In other words, remember Sabbath afternoon was a lot. Well, tomorrow night is kind of a pulling it all together, and there's a lot there. So tomorrow night is a bit intense, so I'm just getting you ready for it. And then the rest of the seminar, the final nights, pretty much is surveying the landscape from the top of the mountain. We've kind of climbed a new mountain to a new height, understanding a relationship with Jesus. Now, how do a lot of things fit into that? We've been talking about that 3-legged stool. The Bible, reading the Bible for the purpose of knowing Jesus, not for doctrinal accuracy, prophetic knowledge, or so you can prove your neighbor wrong on biblical points, but to know Jesus. Stick with the Gospels. Number 2, last night, prayer. Not a 911 prayer list, got to get through all these names, and there may be a time for that kind of prayer, but this is prayer for communion, conversation with Jesus and with the Father. And then tonight we want to talk about sharing. And I know when we get into sharing, the focus seems to always be on how we can convince somebody else to receive Jesus. But in reality, I think maybe a better word, as I've been thinking over this just over the last few months, is service. Simply serving others. If you think about it, Bible and prayer is about the first great commandment, simply loving God back. Sharing or serving is like the second great commandment. Now love your neighbor as yourself. And it's the natural outflowing. And instead of thinking about it so much from a biblical, theological, Bible study standpoint, I'd like to think of it more simply every day, thinking about whatever I'm out to do, whatever my job is, whatever my tasks are that day. Lord, let this day be a day of serving others. And I believe if we were just serving others, He would have us not only serving up just kindness and love and help, but eventually being able to serve up the gospel to people that are ready for it. So let's have one more word of prayer tonight as we get into our topic. Jesus, please come tonight. Holy Spirit, come and impress our minds on just what we need to know about this subject of serving others, the second great commandment, we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. The story is told of a man hiking up one of the passes over the Himalayas in Tibet, and he gets into a snowstorm, into a whiteout. And it's a life and death situation. And he knows that at the peak of the pass is a monastery that's there for the purpose of housing travelers who are in trouble. And so while he's heading up the pass, getting up into this blinding snowstorm, he hears over the edge of the path a cry for help. And he looks way down this steep precipice, and there is a man who's somehow fallen off the trail, is injured, and is crying out for help. But he realizes, given the cold and the storm that's closing in, and the almost impossibility of getting that man up the precipice, he decides if he tries that, they'll both die. And so he leaves the man there, and he heads on up to try to make it to the monastery in time to save his own life. Meanwhile, another man comes by a little while later, and he hears the same cry. And he realizes he may not make it if he tries to help this man, but he just can't let him stay there. And so he carefully goes down that steep bank and finds the man and gets him on his back, and they kind of have to crawl their way back up to the trail, and the snow is getting deeper. And now every step is work, and it's half as fast as normal as he's got this man on his back and he's carrying him along. The lungs are burning, the energy is being used up, But they trudge on hour after hour, and finally they can hear the wind chimes of the monastery through the storm, and they know they're almost there. And suddenly they fall over something in the snow in the path, and they discover it's the body of a man who's frozen to death. That's the first guy. He didn't make it to the monastery. And so they get back up. He gets the man on him again, and they struggle, and they make it to the monastery, and they survive. And it's simply illustrating a principle that the second traveler saved his own life by saving someone else. Instead of it actually costing him his life, it meant he worked harder. They had the two bodies combining warmth, the heart pumping, and the extra exertion is actually what saved his life. In trying to save someone else, he saved himself. Let's go this evening to the book of Matthew, chapter 25. Jesus tells a story. The kingdom of heaven is like a man traveling to a far country who called his own servants and delivered his goods to them. To the one he gave 5 talents, to another 2, and to another 1, each according to his own ability. And immediately he went on his journey. Then he who had received the 5 talents went and traded with them and made another 5 talents. Likewise, the one who received the 2 gained 2 more also. But he who had received the 1 went and dug in the ground and hid his Lord's money. After a long time, the Lord of those servants came and settled accounts with them. He who had received the 5 talents came and brought 5 other talents, saying, Lord, you delivered to me 5 talents. Look, I have gained 5 more besides them. And the Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. He who also had received the 2 talents came and said, Lord, you delivered to me 2 talents. Look, I've gained 2 more talents besides them. And the Lord said to him, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. I want you to notice the reward for doing a good job. It wasn't a all-expenses-paid trip to Tahiti. It wasn't a big bonus. It was more work. You finish one project, you did so good, I'm going to give you a bigger project, and that is called entering into the joy of the Lord. What is this joy? It's the privilege of being involved in the Lord's work. Albert Schweitzer said, this one thing I know, the only ones who will be truly happy are those who have sought and found how to serve. If you remember the Dear Abby and Ann Landers columns, there was every so often somebody writing and saying, my life is just pathetic. Down the drain. Woe is me, a sad tale. What should I do? And the advice always came back, go find someone who's worse off than you and try to make their life better, and you will improve your own situation. I actually have a lady that I know in Phoenix who's a Mormon, and she told me a story I thought was interesting. She said they had a sister in the church who was depressed and having problems with depression, and she went to the elder and said, can you help me? And he said, well, I'm not quite sure what to do, but while I try to see what I can do to help you, Sister so-and-so has a brand new baby, could use some help. Why don't you go see if you can assist her? And when she came back and said, I've solved that one, he said, well, Sister so-and-so over here has 2 kids, and one of them's sick. Would you go help her? And he did that 3 or 4 times, and she came back and said, I'm not depressed anymore. I like that. I think we so often turn to antidepressants or counseling, and I think not all, but an awful lot of the depression in this world is based on self-centeredness. And if we would actually find others and try to make their lives better, I believe a lot of our depressing problems would go away. It's interesting. You look at the people who are the most unhappy in our world, and they're the ones that it seems like we want to be like, the rich and the famous. And yet it seems that they're living for themselves, and they're always looking for the next thrill, and they're always getting themselves addicted to something, or breaking up a marriage, or going into rehab, or involved in some scandal. And in reality, they say that 1 in 6 U.S. adults is on some kind of a psychiatric drug or antidepressant. And it's interesting. the percentage is 20% of whites, and it's only 10% among minorities. What's wrong? Where's the joy of the Lord? People who serve others find joy. They may not have the most fun, but they have the most joy. Have you thought about the difference between fun and joy? Joy is something that can be present even when you're in pain or difficulty or want. Joy is an inner buoyancy that transcends outer circumstances. Fun is a momentary thrill. You do something to get an endorphin rush, but you find out you have to have a bigger something to get the rush again. Whereas joy becomes an inner fountain springing up with life and purpose and meaning. People who serve others find joy. People who serve themselves find moments of fun but drown in a sea of meaninglessness and addiction. My cousin Lee, when he was living in and pastoring in Kansas City, had he got acquainted with a man by the name of Steve Mackey. Steve Mackey had just become the world heavyweight kickboxing champion, the most dangerous refereed sport there is. And somehow Lee got acquainted with him and had the opportunity of introducing to him to a friendship with Jesus. And Steve Mackey and Jesus became good friends. Now, Lee had transferred churches. He was pastoring up in Auburn, Washington, here on the west side. And Steve told him, I'm going to be doing a lecture up in Bellingham on such and such a date. And so Lee said, well, I will drive up there so I can see you, and then I'll take you home, 2.5 hours home for the night, what's left of it when we get home, and I'll take you to the airport in the morning so we have some time to visit. So Lee showed up in Bellingham, and he went looking at the school auditorium backstage for Steve, and he found him back there standing by a kind of a pillar or a post, and Steve Mackey, the tough guy, was crying. He was weeping, and Lee said, "Are you okay?" He said, "Yeah, I'm fine. I was just praying tonight that when these people leave this place, they won't remember Steve Mackey, the kickboxer, but they'll remember Jesus, who's the best friend they can ever have." And he spoke, and his theme was Jesus, not kickboxing. And afterwards, people crowded around for autographs. And one little 9-year-old kid said, "Mr. Mackey, can I have your autograph?" And Steve said, "Yes, but first, if there was one thing I wanted you to remember from what I said tonight, what do you think it was?" And the little boy said, "It was that I can be friends with Jesus and he could be the best friend I would ever want." He said, "Right on," and signed the autograph. And later on the 2.5-hour drive home, it's 2 hours later, Steve Mackey's body time. So it's 11 at night, but it's 1 in the morning for him. Lee said, "Just lean the seat back and get some sleep." And Steve said, "Sleep? I couldn't sleep now." He said, "The biggest endorphin rush I ever get, the biggest adrenaline rush is when I get to tell people about Jesus and I see them get it." Did you see that little boy? He got it tonight. And Steve said, "I can't believe you guys get paid to do this." This could be addicting. Enter into the joy of your Lord. I can tell you there's nothing more joyful than getting a chance to tell somebody about Jesus and seeing them get it. Yeah. Matthew 25:24, then he who had received the 1 talent came and said, "Lord, I knew you to be a hard man, reaping where you have not sown and gathering where you have not scattered seed. And I was afraid and went and hid your talent in the ground. Look, there you have what is yours." And his Lord answered and said to him, "You wicked and lazy servant, you knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I have not scattered seed. So you ought to have deposited my money with the bankers, and at my coming I would have received back my own with interest." Now notice where we head here. Take the talent from him and give it to him who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have abundance. But from him who does not have, even what he has will be taken away. And cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. The guy brings the 1 talent back wrapped up in a handkerchief and says, "See, I didn't lose anything." Didn't lose anything. He lost everything. He's the triple loser. He lost the joy of the Lord. He lost what he'd been given. The 1 talent was given to another, and he's thrown into outer darkness. He at least lost his job, if not his life. It's sobering what Jesus is saying here, because he's saying use it or lose it. Use it or lose it. You know, if you have a broken arm or a broken leg, it's in a cast for 4 to 6 weeks. When you take that cast off, the muscles have atrophied. You have to get physical therapy to bring it back. Muscles, use it or lose it. And it's the same way with the blessings of the Lord. Now, I think that's the reason every gospel ends with a commission. Go therefore, Matthew says, and make disciples of all nations. In Mark, go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. In Luke, thus it was necessary that repentance and remission of sins should be preached in his name to all nations, beginning at Jerusalem, and you are witnesses of these things. And in John, as the Father has sent me, so send I you. We are called to be witnesses, to be servants of other people, both in physical needs and in spiritual realities. Now, I have a question for you. Does God need us to finish the work? You know, we've said for a long time, we've got to finish the work. I had one conference president, he always says, we got to finish this work so we can get off this ball of mud, he would call this world. That was a phrase I heard so many times the few years he was my conference president there in Arizona. And it's a great statement, but does God really need us to finish the work? And I would say no. He could probably get it done quicker with angels. You know, we have stories of people in primitive areas where, you know, in the Amazon jungle or some outback somewhere, the missionary finally goes into some tribe that has been isolated all these years and decades and centuries, and they find a tribe that's living clean lives and like as if they'd been preached the gospel, and they're asked what happened, and we hear the story of a dream that the head man has of a man in white, or a man in white literally coming into the town. We know that angels have gone in. We really like the one that I heard about an Eskimo village in Alaska where they were also keeping the Sabbath, and we Adventists say, now right on, that angel really had it together, right? We like to hear those stories. Jesus said if the people stop crying out, the stones will cry out. God used a donkey to talk, right? God has all kinds of ways. Does he need us to finish the work? I would say no, he doesn't need us. But he does say the gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come. It will be preached. God is going to get the word out to everyone. None will be forgotten. God wants all to be saved. He will make sure all get the message. We, of course, use the text in Revelation 14:6 a lot as Seventh-day Adventists. We've got our 3 angels right up here on the window, right? Another angel flying in the midst of heaven, having the everlasting gospel to preach to those who dwell on the earth, to every nation, tribe, tongue, and people. In the end time, it's very clear in that whole setting of Revelation 12, 13, 14, that there's going to be a time when things are getting tougher and tougher in the world, and the world is going to demand that we bow to idolatrous or ungodly things that they command, just like the 3 Hebrews at the fiery furnace. Bow to this idol or die. That whole picture helps us understand that whole mark of the beast passage, that at some point, if those who live in the end times, and I believe we're there, we're going to face a similar dilemma where civil law will be against God's law and the penalties will be huge, and we'll have to decide if we're going to stand. But it's very clear that at the same time those demands are going out from the beast, there's a message going out from the Lord. 3 angels. And the key message is, worship God, not the beast. You know, give glory to God, not the beast. It's God's judgment, not the beast's judgment you need to be worried about. And we have this message that goes to every tribe, tongue, and people. That angel's high and lifted up, flying in the sky. It makes it very clear that God is going to get the message to everyone. In the end, when things are coming together and coming down. Now, we like to say that we believe that as God's people, Christians, and especially as Seventh-day Adventists in our understanding of the book of Revelation, that we are giving that 3 angels message to the world. But you know what? The angels can give it too, right? Now, Does God need us to finish the work? I would say no. Does he want us to be involved in finishing the work? I would say yes. I want you to take a look at this kind of a little picture here, a word picture. Let's say that we get to heaven, and we're in the city, and that there's some lost people outside the city, and one of them finally gets an interview with Jesus at the pearly gates. Jesus cracks the gate open to talk to him. And the person on the outside says, you know, that Gary Venden fellow lived next to me for 20 years, and he never told me about you. And here I am lost outside the city because he didn't tell me. And Jesus says, you know, I tried to get him to. I impressed him to. I convicted him to. I told him to, but he just never got around to it. I'm really sorry that you are outside the city because Gary never told you. Does that make sense? I want you to think about it. God, who went to all the work to come down from heaven, live and die and rise on this world so that he could save people. The God who went to all of that effort, is he going to let people be lost because one of us doesn't tell them? I don't think so. In fact, I believe that the last great evidence of God's absolute fairness is that we will see, and all the lost will see as well, in the end, that the only reason anyone was lost is because they repeatedly refused the appeals that God sent them. God's strenuous, repeated attempt to save them was turned down. No lost person in the end is going to be able to say, I was lost because of someone else. It will always be they were lost because they refused to come. Now, in giving that little argument, I'm kind of getting us all off the hook on this witnessing thing. In fact, Maury Venden was giving this argument once in a sermon, and he heard the conference president, it was at a camp meeting, the president sitting on the stage behind him muttering, you're taking away all the motivation we use. I don't believe God needs us to finish the work, but I do know it's his plan for us to be involved. I want to be very careful here. There are all kinds of biblical texts and statements that I've read that deal with the fact that it really does sound like that if we don't tell people, there will be eternal loss. And yet, I can't believe that God will allow people to be eternally lost after all he did if we don't say anything. God's going to get the message to everyone. So in a way, I believe we are responsible for sharing. On the other hand, I don't believe it's going to be our fault anyone's actually lost. How do we weigh these two sides and put them together? Notice Romans 9:28. He will finish the work. Who? He? God. God will finish the work and cut it short in righteousness because the Lord will make a short work on the earth. The New American Standard Bible, for the Lord will execute his word on earth thoroughly and quickly. God will get this job done. The Lord will work in this last work in a way that will be contrary to any human planning. God will use ways and means by which it will be seen that he is taking the reins in his own hands. The workers will be surprised by the simple means that he will use to bring about and perfect his work of righteousness. I find that statement interesting because it seems to say God will do something that will amaze us, but somehow in the process he'll also use us. Interesting. One more statement. God will employ agencies whose origin man will be unable to discern. Angels will do a work which men might have had the blessing of accomplishment had they not neglected to answer the claims of God. You see, that tells me there might be some loss if we don't tell others, but it's not going to be lost to the others. We will miss the joy of the Lord. We will miss the blessed opportunity, which brings me to the next question, and that is, who's the primary beneficiary when we share and serve? Notice these verses. Give, and it will be given to you, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over. You want to be inundated with good things? Start giving stuff away. It is more blessed or fortunate to give than to receive. The blessing comes back on us. Enter into the joy of your Lord. If you give absolutely everything you have away, you'll be full of joy. And you'll be the winner, even though you don't have anything left, because you'll have the Lord, and He is everything. The joy of the Lord is your strength. Have you thought about that phrase? The joy of the Lord is your strength. How is it that the joy of the Lord would be my strength? And the way it kind of works for me is this. If I am full of the joy of the Lord, if I'm just oozing and bubbling with the joy of the Lord, how is Satan going to tempt me to do something stupid? Isn't that right? Most of the time, he gets me to do something stupid because I've got empty spots. I've got spots that are vacant, and he says, well, here, try this to fill that hole. And of course, it ends up getting me in trouble or addicted or something, right? It's going to have a kicker in the backside that is more pain than it was worth. But if I'm just full of the joy of the Lord, where's he going to find an interface to get into my heart if I'm full of the joy of the Lord? That's why I think the joy of the Lord is our strength. When we are full of the joy of the Lord, Satan is cooked. He can't get to us because we're full. He can't get us to go do something stupid to fill a spot when we're completely full. I like that idea. Enter into the joy of your Lord. The joy of the Lord is your strength. The effort to bless others will react in blessing upon ourselves. This was the purpose of God in giving us a part to play in the plan of redemption. This is the highest honor, the greatest joy that it is possible for God to bestow upon men. Notice, it doesn't say in that statement in Steps to Christ, page 79, that the purpose God has given us in the plan of redemption is to get other people saved. It's so that we can receive the blessing. Interesting. If you will go to work as Christ designs that his disciples shall, and win souls for him, you will feel the need of a deeper experience and a greater knowledge of divine things, and will hunger and thirst after righteousness. You will plead with God, and your faith will be strengthened, and your soul will drink deeper draughts of the well of salvation. Encountering opposition and trials will drive you to the Bible and prayer. You will grow in grace and the knowledge of Christ, and will develop a rich experience. You see, we get a rich experience out of pouring ourselves out to others. We are the primary beneficiary. And then this statement again, the only way to grow in grace. Now, when you see something like that, it's like, well, I guess this is it. This is the only way. The only way to grow in grace is to engage to the extent of our ability in helping and blessing those who need the help that we can give them. Strength comes by exercise. Activity is the very condition of life. Those who endeavor to maintain the Christian life by passively accepting the blessings that come through the means of grace and doing nothing for Christ are simply trying to live by eating without working. And in the spiritual as in the natural world, this always results in degeneration and decay. A man who would refuse to exercise his limbs would soon lose all power to use them. Thus, the Christian who will not exercise his God-given powers not only fails to grow up into Christ, but he loses the strength that he already has. God could have reached his object in saving sinners without our aid. But in order for us to develop a character like Christ, we must share in his work. In order to enter into his joy, the joy of seeing souls redeemed by his sacrifice, we must participate in his labors for their redemption. I want you to just notice over and over, the point is that we are the beneficiaries when we serve others. So then I want to ask the next question. Who will be the loser if I fail to share? Well, I guess that would be me. In fact, look at our story. Take the talent from him, give it to the one who has 10 talents, and cast the unprofitable servant into the outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. It looks to me like if I fail to invest these talents that God gives me in the service to others, I'm going to get thrown out. I'm the loser. I'm going to be the triple loser. But let me put a question up here. Have we now returned to fear motivation? Have I just gone back to the old fear motivation thing? Instead of saying, if you don't tell others, they'll be lost. People going to Christless graves because you didn't tell them, to try to motivate you to witness. Now, I'm not saying that. I'm saying you're going to be lost if you don't go witness. You better get with it. I don't believe fear motivation is ever the way Christ works. So how does this work? And to me, this passage clears it up. Jesus, in his last discussion with his disciples on the night he was betrayed, walking to the Garden of Gethsemane, evidently saw a vine, past a vineyard where there was a vine coming over a wall, and he told a parable. I am the vine. My Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, he takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, he prunes that it may bear more fruit. Abide in me and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, neither can you unless you abide in me. I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for without me you can do nothing. If anyone does not abide in me, he is cast out as a branch and is withered, and they gather them and throw them into the fire, and they are burned. What will happen to us if we fail to bear fruit? Verse 2, we'll be taken away. Verse 6, we'll be thrown in the fire. See, you better bear fruit or you're going to burn. Now, wait a minute. What does this verse actually say, though? Does this verse ever tell us to bear fruit, or does it simply tell us what will happen if we don't? It never tells us to bear fruit. What does it tell us to do? Abide in me. That's the only thing it tells us to do in the whole passage. It doesn't tell us to get pruned, get rid of our sins. It doesn't tell us to bear fruit, get on with the good things. It tells us to abide. And it says the one who abides will bear much fruit. And then it says the one who bears fruit, verse 2, will get pruned. So if I abide in Jesus, if I focus on the relationship, will my life be fruitful? Can't help it. And if my life is fruitful because I'm abiding, will God be snipping off the dead branches and showy leaves and sins and things? Yes. If I want to get on with righteousness and get off with sinning, I abide. And if I'm abiding, fruit will come, and I'll be bubbling over with the reality of God, and I'll have things to share. They can taste and see that the Lord is good. So I don't need to worry about sharing. I don't need to worry about bearing enough fruit so I don't get thrown in the fire. I need to focus on one thing: abide in Jesus. And if I abide in Jesus, Bible and prayer, spending time with him, sharing will happen, fruit will come, and sin will be taken away. Not by me quitting sinning, but by God cutting it off as he brings fruit because I'm abiding. Do you see where we've landed now? I want to make sure that you're not feeling fear pressure to share lest people go to Christless graves. And yet I believe that Jesus' heart breaks for lost people. And our hearts should be breaking for lost people, not because we're afraid of losing, but because we've received the heart of Christ by abiding in him. And I don't want you fear-motivated that you're going to get thrown in the fire if you don't share. Although it does seem to say, if you don't bear fruit, you'll be thrown in the fire. But that's not the motivation. You'll never get to heaven by trying to get out of the fire. You never get up the mountain by trying to get out of the valley. You're backing up the mountain trying to get away from the valley. No, you turn around and climb the mountain. We turn to Jesus, and we come to him, and we abide. And if we're abiding, he says the fruit will come, the sins will go. I don't need to be afraid of people going to Christless graves, although I will have the heart of Jesus, and I will be concerned for them. And I don't need to be afraid that I'm going to the flames because I didn't share enough. I check off enough boxes on the report. No. If I abide, he says the rest will happen. And I'll get to enter into the joy of the Lord of sharing, and it will be a natural bubbling over, not a forced. And I'll get to experience the sins being clipped off because the vine dresser is taking them away, so I can bear even more fruit. Are you with me on this now? No sooner does one come to Christ that there is born in his heart a desire to make known to others what a precious friend he has found in Jesus. There's the center of our witnessing, folks. We have a little thing we've done in our church for the last year or so. We call it the mingle moment. And I've been trying to encourage people every day to ask God to give them a mingle. Help them to find somebody that they run into that they can say a word to or have a mingle moment. Just say hello, become friends a little bit. Whether it's the checkout person at the grocery store, somebody on the street or somebody on the bus or whatever. Try to mingle with people so that you have opportunities to make friends, and hopefully those friends eventually you can introduce to Jesus. And it's so funny. There are certain people, to them a mingle moment is, the guy came over to fix my air conditioner and I told him all about the Sabbath and the state of the dead and Daniel 2 and... Is that a good mingle? Well, if that's what God tells you to say, I'm not going to tell you not to. But what about just making friends? But mingling with people, realizing we're not here to make a living. We're here to mingle with people and tell them about Jesus every chance we get. But first, we got to make friends with them, because it's a lot easier to share something with a friend than with a stranger. Who's the primary beneficiary when I share Jesus with others? I am. Who's the primary loser if I fail to share? I am. But I'm not telling you that to create a fear, obligation, and duty, because it all comes down to abiding. Think of God calling a council in heaven, calls all the angels together, and God says to the angels, we've been talking about what's going on down there on planet Earth. Those people have a special place in our hearts, and we want to shower as many blessings on them as we can. So God asked the angels, what do you angels find brings you the greatest joy? And of course, the angels are all raising their wings saying, pick me, pick me. And finally, God asked one of them for the answer, and he says, I get the greatest joy out of helping people connect with you. Nothing's better than that. That is the greatest joy. And God responds, well, then we shouldn't hoard all the joy to ourselves. Let's give them a chance to get involved in the joy as well. What turns heaven on and excites heaven is what God knows will float our boat and excite us. What does God do more than anything else? He seeks lost people. So if you want to hang out with Jesus, where are you going to end up hanging out with? Lost people that he's seeking. Isn't that right? I don't think we need to worry about if we're truly abiding in Jesus, we'll be locked in some monastery somewhere and won't get around people. If we're hanging out with Jesus, we're going to end up hanging out with people. Because if you walk with Jesus, you may spend time in the morning intimate with God, just the two of you, but then he's going to go out and walk with you through the day. And that's going to be service. The first commandment, hanging out with Jesus, will be followed by the second one, loving others as yourself. Henry Blackaby, in Experiencing God, says, don't try to figure out what you can do for God. Find out what God is doing and go join him. You know, in the Bible, Jesus told three stories. The lost son, the prodigal. He knew he was lost. He set out to be lost and rebellious. He knows he's lost and he knows the way home. But when he finally comes home, they throw a party. Then there's the lost sheep. The sheep knows it's lost, but doesn't know the way home and can be just a few feet from the flock and be totally lost. And when the shepherd goes and finds the lost sheep and brings it home, there's a party. And then there's the lost coin. The lost coin is lost inside the house, not out in the wilderness somewhere. The coin doesn't even know it's lost, but they go looking for the coin. And when they find the coin that's lost in the house and doesn't even know it's lost, they bring it home, or they bring it out and they throw a party. Great joy. The good news is that God is looking for those who know they're lost. God is looking for those who know they're lost and don't know the way home. God's looking for those who don't know they're lost and know the way home. And he's looking for those who don't even know they're lost. In reality, everybody's looking for God. Whether it's in a bottle or a drug or trying to get rich or power or fame. They're all looking for God. And the answer would be found if they can just find Jesus. The good news is God throws a party over anyone, and he wants us involved in the finding and the rejoicing. We pastors have too often taken the Greyhound bus approach. Remember the slogan, if you're old enough to remember this? Sit back and leave the driving to us. As if, we're the experts. We've been to seminary. We have the training, the studies, the books, the workshops, the seminars. You just show up, we'll preach the gospel. Shame on us. We're not going to finish the work that way. It's when we're all bubbling over with Jesus that the work will get finished. And by the way, if I could guilt you into witnessing, you know what you'd end up doing? You'd end up saying, well, now, if some people are going to be lost if I don't witness, they'll be lost if I witness wrong. So I better just pay the professionals to do it and get it done right. It still backfires. Only God's love motivation works. So let's talk about witnessing 101. Mark chapter 5. The story of the demoniacs. One of the Gospels has one demoniac, another Gospel has two demoniacs. But when Jesus went across the sea and there were those demoniacs living among the tombs, and they came rushing out, and Jesus stopped them with the power of God. And remember, the demons said they were a legion of them, and can we go into the pigs? And they went in the pigs, and the pigs all ran down and drowned in the sea, 2,000 of them. Jesus was hard on the local economy. And the people in the town came and begged him to leave, but they saw the demoniac sitting there clothed and in his right mind. So when Jesus responded to their request that he leave, and he got into the boat, he who had been demon-possessed begged him that he might be with him. Now, I will tell you, when I was a little kid, the first time I read this story, I remember it. The first time I read this story in the Bible, I'm thinking, I'm expecting the next verse to say, Jesus says, come on with me. Isn't that what you'd expect? And instead, Jesus says, no. He did not permit him, but said, go home to your friends and tell them what great things the Lord has done for you and how he has had compassion on you, or literally how he has mercied you. And he departed and began to proclaim in Decapolis all that Jesus had done for him, and all marveled. This is interesting. This man didn't know enough to witness, we would think, about anything. He didn't know any Bible studies. He hadn't heard a single sermon from Jesus. He probably didn't even have a Bible to read. What's he going to do? Notice, Jesus says, go home to your friends and tell them the great things the Lord has done for you. Go. To whom? Strangers? No, go to your friends. Go to family. Go to your neighbors. Literally, go off to your house and to yours. Go to the people in your life circle. And tell them what? Tell them what the Lord's done for you. You shall be witnesses to me in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. Where were the disciples to start? Right at home. The first works of the church were seen when the believers sought out friends, relatives, and acquaintances, and with hearts overflowing with love. Notice a bubbling over told the story of what Jesus was to them and what they were to Jesus. Go and tell what great things the Lord has done for you and how he has mercied you. He who is mighty has done great things for me. Can you say that? Then tell people what great... If you're bubbling over with the great things God has done for you, you're going to end up telling people. You know, you get a new car, you want to show it to your friends. You get a new outfit, you want people to see it. You get a new house, you want to invite them over. You get something new, you want to share it. If you're sitting at the feet of Jesus daily and he's doing great things in your life, you're going to be bubbling over like a fountain. They're going to have to kill you to shut you up. Remember, the disciples after Pentecost, the only way to shut them up was to kill them. You know, we pastors, we want to get you to go witness. We need to get you to open up. I believe if you're sitting daily at the feet of Jesus, he will open you up. And when things are happening, you'll have something to talk about. People are impressed with your personal relationship with Jesus a lot more than biblical information you talk at them with. People are hungry for a relationship with God, even if they don't know it. What they need is people who know Jesus and have a fresh daily experience to introduce him to them. Jesus said, when I am lifted up, I will draw all to myself. All we need to do is talk about Jesus and what a friend he is to us and we are to him. The two restored demoniacs were the first missionaries whom Christ sent to preach the gospel in the region of Decapolis. For a few moments only, these men had been privileged to hear the teachings of Christ. Not one sermon from his lips had ever fallen on their ears. They could not instruct the people as the disciples who had been daily with Jesus were able to do. Notice they couldn't do what the disciples could have done. However, they bore in their own persons the evidence that Jesus was the Messiah. They had been set free. They could tell what they knew, what they themselves had seen and heard, and felt of the power of Christ. This is what everyone can do whose heart has been touched by the grace of God. As witnesses for Christ, we are to tell what we know, what we ourselves have seen and heard and felt. If we have been following Jesus step by step, abiding in him, we shall have something right to the point to tell concerning the way in which he has led us. Notice this is not proof text Bible studies. This is telling people what Jesus has been doing for you. We can tell how we have tested his promises and found the promise true. We can bear witness to what we have known of the grace of Christ. This is the witness for which our Lord calls, and for want of which the world is perishing. I don't believe Jesus' plan is that when someone comes over to fix your air conditioner, you try to give them a Bible study on some doctrinal point. I believe Jesus wants you to be bubbling so over with him that they just get inundated with Jesus and the love of Jesus and your love towards them in Jesus. A friendship that goes deeper than trivia as you just make friends with people for Jesus. I believe that is the kind of witnessing Jesus is after. Christ's method alone will give true success in reaching the people. The Savior mingled with men as one who desired their good. That's where we got our mingle moment from at our church. Go out and mingle with people as if you desire their good. He showed his sympathy for them. His heart reached out to them. He ministered their needs. He simply helped where he could, and he won their confidence. Then he bade them follow me. I think we need to make friends before we try to make converts. There is need of coming close to people by personal effort. If less time were given to sermonizing and more time were spent in personal ministry, greater results would be seen. Accompanied by the power of persuasion, the power of prayer, the power of the love of God, this work cannot be without fruit. It's powerful stuff, isn't it? Jesus tells us who to talk to. Who? Our friends and family. If you don't have anybody to talk to, what should you do? Go make some friends. We should be all out trying to make friends of people who we normally wouldn't seek out as friends. Not because we need friends, but because we need to become friends with people so their hearts will be open for us to share what Jesus has done for us. We should be constantly looking around saying, Lord, who do you want me to make friends with today? And he will open those doors. People are not perishing for want of knowing what church they should go to or what day they should worship on. People from church and the worship on the Sabbath killed Jesus. It's the testimony of what Jesus means to us and we mean to him. What a friend we have in Jesus. That is where it all comes together. If I go up to a stranger, what should my first objective be? To make friends. We're far more influenced by our friends than by strangers. You know when strangers come to your door, 2 or 3 at a time with a Bible under their arm. I'm not home, right? I don't answer the door. I know people who answer the door because they like to argue. I don't, so I don't answer the door. We run from people who come with a message. And yet, that seems to be how we think we're supposed to act. No. Go make friends with people. When a friend comes and says, let me tell you what God's done for me, we're all ears. When a stranger comes with their Bible under their arm, we're ready to run the other way. No wonder they run from us. Here's the cool thing. No training necessary. Think about those demoniacs. They had no training. They'd simply been set free by Jesus. And that's the only message they had, is we were demon-controlled for so long and could not help it, but Jesus set us free. He is the power of God in us. Just spend daily time getting better acquainted with Jesus, and then talk to people about what Jesus is doing in your life. You don't need any training to be a witness for Jesus. Now, if you get a chance to get some training, feel free. God does want us to become powerful in the Word. We should know what we believe and why and be able to give an answer. But don't wait for training to start telling people what Jesus is doing for you. Just sit at His feet and watch what He does. And ask Him to fill you so full of the joy of the Lord that you are bubbling over all over everybody else. A man in his mid-80s by the name of Larry Claridge was a quiet man. He had little to say, but he did a lot. And he was a champion for Jesus, and he said, I'm going to die in the saddle with my boots on. One day, Larry, again in his 80s, is driving through the small town where he lives, and he sees a man literally laying in the gutter. He thought the man had probably fallen, maybe been hit by a car and needed help. So he stopped to help this guy and just discovered that he was simply so dead drunk he couldn't stand up. But he'd already stopped, so he helped the man into his truck and he said, where in the world do you live? And the man finally, after some wandering around, got him to where he lived. And where he lived was in a cab-over camper in the middle of a field. There was no truck, just the cab-over camper. And so Larry helped him in there and helped him into some clean clothes and got him into bed and left a paper on this little table there that had his name and phone number and said, if you ever need any help, give me a call. Oh, but was he asking for trouble? He began getting calls, usually about 1 or 2 in the morning when the bar was closing. The bartender would say, there's a man here who's too drunk to even walk out the door, but he handed me this note and said, if I'd call you, you'd come and help him. So Larry would get up in the middle of the night and go down and take this man home to his cab-over camper. And many times he would sit there all night because he was afraid the man would vomit and drown in his own vomit. So he stayed there to make sure he made it through the night. This happened time and time and time again. After a number of weeks or even months, one morning the guy woke up and Larry was sitting there. And he said, why do you keep coming to my rescue? And Larry said, because someone keeps coming to my rescue. I'm just paying it forward. Who rescues you? The man asked. Does he live around here? Yeah. What's his name? Jesus. I've never met him. Could you introduce me? I'd like to meet him. I could, but I'd have to use a Bible to do that because that's where I meet with him every day. Never had a Bible. Don't know what's inside. I'll get you a Bible, Larry said. Larry began going to the camper now, and all he did with this man was begin reading through the Gospel of John. Just talking about Jesus, introducing him to his friend Jesus. After several months of this, one day the man said, do you go to church somewhere? And Larry said, yeah, and told him what church. Can I go with you? Of course, I'd be glad to take you. What do I wear? What do you have to wear? Well, he said, I got jeans, a flannel shirt, a baseball cap, and tennis shoes. Perfect. I'll pick you up Saturday morning. And Saturday morning, Larry, who was an elder in his church that televised their services, showed up in a flannel shirt, blue jeans, a baseball cap, and tennis shoes. Picked up the gentleman, and they walked into church and walked all the way down the aisle and sat right down in the front. The man didn't take his cap off. Larry didn't take his cap off. He wanted that man to feel comfortable. And a few weeks later, a few months later, Larry said, I got to watch that man be baptized and become a Seventh-day Adventist Christian. He said, it doesn't get any better than that. Enter into the joy of your Lord. But it was a lot of dirty work getting there. But what was the dirty work? Serving. He served until he had a chance to share. Then he shared and kept serving. and somebody will be in the kingdom. Now, would God have found another way? Again, I say somebody will be in the kingdom because of what Larry did. I believe that's absolutely true. I also believe if Larry hadn't done it, God would have found some other way to appeal to this man. I don't believe what we have to do in sharing is optional or unnecessary. So I've got this dichotomy I have to hold in my two hands. I don't believe God's going to let anybody be lost for any fault other than their own refusal. On the other hand, God says, you go out and work and people will be saved. I can't theologically resolve that, but I have to resolve one thing, and that is I'm not going to use fear motivation. They're going to be lost if you don't go, or you're going to be lost if you don't go. I don't believe God works from fear motivation. He says, abide in me, you'll bear fruit. And yet, I believe if we are sitting at the feet of Jesus, He will so imbue us with His heart that we won't be able to sit still when there are lost people around that we can befriend and share Jesus with. But the motivation comes out of the abiding relationship. We're back to a relational theology. It all comes down to that relationship. If you've been at the table, you'll have something to share. If you sit with Jesus daily, He will bubble over out of you. So I want to suggest that you try and experiment. Get a Post-it note or a Sharpie to write on your mirror or something. And here's the experiment. Every morning, at the close of your time alone with Jesus. Okay, so you can't complete the experiment if you don't start with some time with Jesus. Have you got that? So after you've done some abiding, in your prayer, ask Him, Jesus, would you please open my eyes today to specific opportunities you arrange where I can make a difference in people's lives for you, Jesus, and for your kingdom. And give me a nudge when it happens so I don't miss it. I think that's printed in your notes at the very end. I keep forgetting to ask this. So, put it on a Post-it note on your dashboard in your car, on the mirror in your bathroom, so that at the beginning of your day, you're reminded to ask Jesus, would you set up some kind of a divine mingle today where I can mingle with someone in caring so that I can serve and win their confidence so that hopefully someday I can share Jesus and help them find the kingdom. I would like to challenge you to do that every day. Karen lived in Kansas City, and she was an introvert. She was shy, quiet, behind-the-scenes helper, and the pastor gave this challenge one Sabbath. And she decided to start praying this prayer every morning. So Monday morning, she prayed that prayer before she went to work. She worked in a government office. She was in human resources and personnel and had several hundred people that she was responsible for. That day, while she was sitting in her office, doing whatever her work was, one of her workers under her came and knocked on the door. The lady came in and said, "Can I speak with you?" She said, "Sure, sit down." And this lady poured out a story that was so tragic, devastating, and sad that Karen wondered how she even got out of bed in the morning, much less performed on the job. And when this lady was done pouring out her heart, Karen heard herself saying, "Can I pray for you?" And the woman said, "Yes." And Karen realized she'd never prayed for anybody out loud before like that. So she said, "I'll keep you in my prayers every morning when I talk to Jesus." The lady said, "Now?" And Karen said she simply sent up a little quiet prayer, "Lord, give me prayer for this woman." And she said, "I began to pray, and a prayer poured out for this woman that I didn't even know was in me, asking God to put His arms around her and lift the burdens and, get her through the valley of shadows and give her a sense of purpose and direction." When she was done praying, the lady was weeping. She said, "That's the first time anybody's ever prayed for me like that." The next day, Tuesday, another lady knocked on the door and said, "I heard you prayed with Sally. I'd like you to pray with me. Told her story, and once again, Karen said, Lord, give me prayer, and prayed over this woman. That same afternoon, 2 more came in and said, we heard you prayed for Sally and Jane. Would you pray for us? And on Wednesday, they all 4 came in and said, we've been comparing notes, and we've all come to the same conclusion. When you talk to God, you talk like you're talking to a friend. How does that work? She said, well, Jesus is my best friend. I'm talking to my friend. They said, no, Jesus can't be your personal friend. He's too busy running the universe. How do you do that with somebody who's invisible? She said, I meet with him every day in his word. Would you like to meet with him too? They said, yes. And she said, Pastor, today we began reading the Bible, just reading the Gospels together over lunch and meeting Jesus at work. She said, I've never had anything bring me so much joy. I read a book. I'll put the book title up on the closing slide. It's called About My Father's Business by Reggie Campbell. A dear saint of a man, not a Seventh-day Adventist, but a real follower of Jesus, who, by the way, just recently passed away. He was in his 80s. And that book is his attempt. He was a businessman high up in sales in big corporations, so it was pressure work, and it was leading others by pressuring them. And then he met Jesus. He ended up quitting his job and trying to do a startup so that he could have a business that functioned like Jesus functions. And God actually ended him back up in the corporate world again, but with a whole new attitude. And in that book, he shows the simple ways he found to pray for people and seek to do what we've been talking about. And it's one of the most fun and interesting books. I'm not going to tell you all about it, but I'd encourage you to get it. I believe it's on Kindle. You can always buy it on Amazon. About My Father's Business by Reggie Campbell. Just one business person, not a preacher, not a clergy, not a minister, but a businessman who found Jesus and found how Jesus helped him bubble over for Jesus into people's lives. Powerful, powerful book. I believe that the only real fruit is natural fruit. You think about it. The only fruit that's good is natural fruit. I was in Cheyenne, Wyoming doing this seminar the very first time I did it. And it took the pastor and one of the elders in the church. We went out to a salad bar back when they allowed salad bars. And I remember there was this whole beautiful table of fruit. There was cut fruit in bowls, and then there was just a stack of fresh fruit. And I thought, well, I'd just like to peel my own orange and eat it. So I reached out and I grabbed this orange, and instantly I knew it wasn't real. It was fake. It was a good-looking fake orange, let me tell you. They had beautiful fake fruit, but it had no flavor. I put it back quick, hoping nobody saw me. I felt foolish. The only good fruit is real, natural fruit. When you try to force the witness, it's not going to taste good. I believe the only real witness is a natural witness. You can't threaten a tree to get more fruit, but you can fertilize and water it, and fruit comes naturally. And Jesus says, if you will abide in me, you will bear much fruit. We sit at the feet of Jesus, and we drink of the water of life, and we let that biblical fertilizer get into us as we read about the life of Jesus. The only true witness is a natural witness, bubbling over from a rich relationship. I remember when I was a kid, 4 or 5 years old, my grandma came to live with us, my grandma Venden, and one day she got a whistling teapot. Now, as a 4 or 5-year-old, I'd never heard of a whistling teapot. And she said, this is really cool. You put water in it and you put it on the stove, and pretty soon, and we waited, it'll whistle. Oh, well, I waited to hear it whistle. And sure enough, it started to whistle loud, and I was so excited. This is cool. She promptly turned the stove off and took it off, and I'm going, we finally got it whistling. Why did you stop it? I thought the whistling was cool. I believe if we'll put our teapot on the stove of Jesus every morning, it'll start whistling. And it will be a natural whistle. Enter into the joy of your Lord. It's not going to come by forcing yourself to go door to door. One final story. When I was pastoring just north of San Francisco in Marin County, this is 25 years ago now, close to 30 years ago now. There was a man, he was an ex-FBI agent, retired. He was single. He said he married the same woman 3 times. It didn't work any of the 3. But he had hung out for a while with Jehovah's Witnesses. Then he discovered the Sabbath, and he came and hung out with the Adventists for a while. He never joined, and he finally moved on. He kind of moved around. But when he got to me, he'd just been hanging out with the Jehovah's Witnesses. And he would come to me and he'd say, "Pastor, let's go witnessing." And I knew what he meant. Let's go knock on doors. And I'd rather chew gravel than do that. That's not my thing. But how, if you're the pastor, do you tell someone, "No, I don't want to go witnessing"? I couldn't do it. So we'd walk down the street, 5:30 when people are getting home, knock on the door. I'd say, "Ralph, you take the lead. I'm going to watch." So I'd stand back and he'd knock on the door. "Hi, I'm Ralph. This is Gary. We're from the Adventist Church." Wham! The door would shut. You go to the next house. "Hi, I'm Ralph. This is Gary. We're from the Adventist Church." Wham! The door would shut. After about 5 of those, I just wanted to crawl in a culvert and go to sleep. You feel depressed. He somehow, it energized him. I don't know why. But as I remember doing that, and I came to a conclusion. We were not out witnessing. We were out annoying people. Isn't that right? We were not out witnessing. We were out annoying people. I guarantee, if your witness is a natural bubbling over, the fruit will taste good, it won't annoy people, and it'll actually do some good. And you will find joy. I believe the third leg of the stool is absolutely vital. Because there are 2 seas in the Middle East. There's the Sea of Galilee that they can still fish on to this day. The water is fresh, and it produces life. It has inlets, and it has a major outlet. The Jordan River. But at the other end of the Jordan River is the Dead Sea. It has all ins and no outs, and it is dead. I don't believe we can have a vital, abiding experience if we try to hold it in. Eventually, we'll blow up. But I believe if we have a true abiding experience, God says you'll bear fruit. And the fruit will be good, and the fruit will be abundant. And it will be tasty fruit. It will be natural fruit, and you will experience the joy of seeing people taste and see that the Lord is good. We get to be part of the process, and it's all for our good, and it's for their good, and it's all good.